I have received a letter from the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition proposing that a definite matter of public importance be submitted to the House for discussion, namely the hurt and division caused by the government's unfair budget and broken promises. I call upon the honourable members who approve of the proposed discussion to rise in their places. I call the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And despite the shenanigans by the government, who will do anything not to debate the budget, this dreadful budget, it's been 2 weeks since it was handed down, and the people of Australia have made their verdict clear on this most unfair budget. Australians from all walks of life, from all parts of Australia, from all sorts of political affiliations have said that this budget for Australia is the wrong budget. It's the wrong budget for our economy. It is the wrong budget for our communities. Australians and Labor acknowledge that Mr Abbott has been given a great chance at the last election. But since then, he has got it all wrong. The country that Tony Abbott wants to build is not the country that Australians want to see. The Prime Minister is taking Australians down the wrong path. We do not want the Australia that Tony Abbott wants, the future that Tony Abbott wants for our families. Australians are deeply concerned that the Abbott government is creating a permanent underclass. There is no point to being a mean-hearted government. This great country of ours has taken decades to create, and yet this Abbott government budget will tear it down much more quickly. Australians are generous enough. Australians know that this is indeed a lucky country. They know that it is mean, that it is unreasonable to make Australians who earn less than $60,000, less than $50,000 a year carry the burden of this budget. Supporters of Labor and supporters of the coalition all understand that the no support for young people who are unemployed under the age of 30 will indeed create a society where more of our young people sleep rough. This budget should put on notice to the government and the reaction of the people: do not push the Australian people too hard. Do not take Australia where they do not want to go. Australians do not want a beggar society. We do not want our young people sleeping on grates to get the warmth. And look at the Liberals walk out. The truth is too hard for them to hear. And we don't want Australians barred from seeing their doctor or seeking life-saving preventative care. We recognise that this budget is a fork in the road, and there are choices before this parliament to make. Labor will not allow this budget to do to Australia what Margaret Thatcher did to the United Kingdom in the early 1980s. It is a budget drawn up with no understanding of how this country works. It is a budget which says that you can either have a tough society or a fair society, but you can't have both. Labor understands that we can have a sustainable budget. We understand that tough decisions need to be made, that our terms of trade have decreased and nominal GDP is falling. But what we also understand is that in order to make the budget sustainable, we do not have to challenge the basic pillars of Australian life. We do not need to undermine universal health care. We do not need to undermine the disability insurance scheme and the lives lived by people with disabilities and their carers. We can sustain a decent pension and education for all. We can sustain a fair national minimum wage and full employment along with compulsory superannuation. The Liberal Party only have one prescription for Australia. It is that of extreme ideology, the vested interest of the Commission of Audit written by their friends in parts of big business. The Liberal budget of last fortnight has a view which says that society should leave people to fend for themselves. This budget, however, makes little difference to some of the very privileged representatives who sit opposite us. This talk by Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey that we're all sharing the pain equally, that there's an equality of sacrifice, it is a fairy tale. At the same time that pensioners are asked to lose payments and supplements and concessions, we have this government engaging in self-promotional propaganda and advertising. At the same time that the sick and vulnerable are being taxed to go to the doctor, we have millionaires who will receive $50,000 extra for having a baby. Hard-working Australians are being told that they can work till 70. Abbott cabinet ministers will be able to retire at 60 with a defined benefit pension. Our universities are being deregulated with access to higher education, consciously designed top-down to discourage children from less advantaged backgrounds and their parents from ever having the hope of going to university. We've even got a petrol tax which is so manufactured that every Australian is going to pay it. And then today we discover in estimates that Tony Abbott's great austere approach of staying at the police academy is in fact costing $1.7 million, what he is seeking to do. While the battler, Mr Abbott, sits with multi-million-dollar support in what he is doing, he would lecture Australians to do much worse. Well, let me tell you, I understand that Tony Abbott's a fan of Downton Abbey. I understand that he has butlers himself. Can I say, though, that this butler, the resources going to the Prime Minister are not appropriate for a man who would lecture and moralise the rest of Australia. We believe in a mature and sophisticated, generous society and community, and this budget does divide the country. We put our faith in Labor. We put our faith in three elements towards Australian progress. We believe that this nation can have in the future a generous and decent safety net. We also believe in encouraging the dreams of Australians to be able to do better for them and their families. And we have a practical sense of how this economy needs to adapt in the future. This budget makes the difference in Labor values to Liberal values crystal clear. And I know that the government have been complaining, what is the alternative? Well, why don't you test your budget in an election, let the Australians decide who has the better alternative. But there's no chance of this cowardly mob in the government ever submitting this budget to an election before they inflict their pain on Australians. The government's been saying of Labor, and some of their friends in the Conservative columns of some newspapers have been saying that Labor is being negative, that somehow we are not doing what the government wants to do. Well, I'll tell you what negative is. Negative is a new GP tax. Positive is supporting Medicare. I'll tell you what negative is. It's making sure that $30 billion comes out of schools in Australia. Positive is what Labor would do and fund our schools according to need so that every child can get a great education. Negative is doubling the cost of degrees. It's increasing the rate of interest of repayment. It's discouraging the dreams of normal people to send their kids to university. Positive is making sure that universities remain in the reach of ordinary Australians and are not just the preserve of the very privileged. Negative is sentencing Australians under 30 who are unemployed to 6 months without any form of income. That is cost-shifting the burden of Australian society and finding employment from government onto the shoulders and the backs of the unemployed and their families. Positive is helping Australians find work. Negative is pushing pensioners by decreasing the rate of their indexation. How dare the Treasurer of Australia say that because there is no cut to pensions in this country? The facts speak for themselves. $400 million plus is being treated as a cut to the cost of pensions in 2017 in the forward estimates of this government's budget. We believe in a better Australia than the government do. We understand that the government do not understand the health system of Australia. We understand that this government do not get education. We understand that this government do not get cost of living pressures. We get that this government does not understand the regions. And when will the National Party stand up for the regions of Australia that they claim to love? It's all right for them to say things in their local newspapers. It's all right for them to say things in the privacy of their own caucus rooms. When will they stand up for country Australia? But the good news for regional Australia is Labor will stand up for country Australia. Today, there have been two very different party meetings held in this building. On this side of the House, we met to stand up for Medicare. We met to stand up for kids at school. We met to stand up for pensioners. We met to stand up for ordinary Australians with cost of living pressures. But then there was that other meeting where you had people either sycophantly saying, "Thank you, Prime Minister, for the worst budget I've ever seen." I don't often agree with Senator Corey Bernard. In fact, I never agree with him. But I do note that he wrote to our supporters, he said, that this budget is one of the dumbest in decades. Dumbest in decades. Senator Cory Bernardi proving that even a stop clock can be right once a day. But then we also see twice. Well, you've never been right twice on this budget, sunshine. And then we go back to what happened in their party room. Look at the member for Eden Monero. Hundreds of jobs going out of Queanbeyan, nothing to be done for the pensioners. The good news is that the voters will have their desserts. This budget divides Australia and Labor will fight it all the way.
Thank the Leader of the Opposition.